Admiral Kethvar stood on the command bridge of the Narn flagship, the Eternal Dominion, his clawed hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out into the void. The stars stretched before him like scattered jewels on black velvet, indifferent to the ambitions of empires. At 5012 Galactic Era, the Narn Empire had conquered 100 systems, their fleets carving paths through lesser civilizations with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Kethvar, a towering figure with iridescent scales that shimmered under the bridge's harsh lights, had led many of those conquests. His eyes, sharp and golden, reflected the cold certainty of a warrior who had never known defeat. But today, as the fleet approached the forbidden borders of the Sol system, a faint unease stirred in his chest, a whisper he dismissed as the remnants of old spacer tales. The bridge hummed with activity. Officers in crisp uniforms darted between consoles, their voices a low murmur of efficiency. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Vara, his second in command, approaching with a holographic tablet. She was younger, her scales still vibrant with the hue of youth, but her eyes held the fire of ambition. "We've received the latest intelligence briefs. The Terran borders are marked by automated buoys broadcasting warnings in over 1,000 languages. They speak of consequences for intrusion." Kethvar let out a rumbling laugh, echoing like thunder in the confined space. Consequences? From humans, those soft-skinned primates who barely clawed their way out of their cradle world. He waved a hand dismissively, the gesture sending ripples through the air as if parting invisible curtains. "I've heard the stories, Vara. Ghost fleets vanishing in the night, ships found adrift with crews turned to dust, children's tales to scare fledgling empires. The Terrans are relics, isolated, weakened by their own wars. Their defense protocols are myths perpetuated to hide their vulnerability." Vara hesitated, her tail twitching slightly, a telltale sign of doubt among their kind. "But sir, the records are consistent. No expedition has returned from Sol in centuries. Even the Vorlax hegemony, with their superior cloaking tech, sent a scout armada, and nothing, not even debris." Kethvar turned to her, his gaze piercing. In his mind, he replayed the council meeting on Narn Prime, where the Emperor himself had tasked him with this mission. "Claim the Sol system," the Emperor had commanded, his voice a gravelly decree. "Their resources will fuel our expansion. Ignore the superstitions, they are the delusions of the defeated." Kethvar had nodded, feeling the weight of honor upon him. Failure was not an option. It would mean disgrace, exile, or worse. Yet, deep down, a small voice wondered, why had no one succeeded? He pushed it aside. Doubt was the enemy of command. "Prepare the fleet for border crossing," he ordered, his voice steady. "Full sensor sweeps. If there's anything out there, we'll crush it before it knows we're coming." As the orders cascaded through the comms, Kethvar felt the ship's engines thrum beneath his feet, a vibration that resonated with his own pulse. The Eternal Dominion was a behemoth, armed with plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids and shields that had withstood supernova remnants. Flanking it were 100 vessels, destroyers, cruisers, carriers laden with fighters. Together, they formed a spearhead of Narn might, cutting through the stars toward the invisible line that marked Terran space. In the quiet moments between commands, Kethvar's thoughts drifted to his homeworld. Narn, with its crimson skies and towering spires, where strength was revered above all. He had risen from a lowly cadet to admiral through sheer will, maneuvering rivals with cunning tactics and unyielding resolve. But lately, in the solitude of his quarters, he found himself staring at the stars, pondering the vastness. "This universe is too ordered for chance," he had once confided to his mate before she passed in a border skirmish. "There must be something greater watching." She had smiled, her eyes soft. "Perhaps, but it's our claws that shape destiny, not some invisible hand." Now, as the fleet neared the buoys, that memory brought a pang of loss. He shook it off, focusing on the holographic display. The warnings blared across the screens. "Terran Federation border. Intrusion will invoke Protocol Omega. Turn back or face consequences." The message repeated in Narnish, translated flawlessly, but Kethvar muted it with a flick of his claw. "Primitive," he muttered. "They rely on words, not weapons." The fleet crossed the line. No alarms wailed. No interceptors appeared. The stars remained silent witnesses. Tension hung in the air like a fog, officers exchanging glances. Kethvar paced the bridge, his boots clanging against the metal grating. "Report," he barked. "All clear, Admiral," came the reply from sensors. "No contacts. Ambient radiation normal. It's empty, empty." The word echoed in Kethvar's mind. Too empty. In conquered systems, there were always patrols, mines, or at least debris from past battles. Here, nothing. A chill crept along his spine, but he attributed it to the cold of space seeping through the hull. "Proceed at half speed. Launch probes ahead." As the probes shot forward, their feeds streamed back, vast expanses of void, dotted with distant asteroids. No signs of life, no hidden fleets. Kethvar leaned against the railing, his mind racing. Perhaps the tales were true in one sense. The Terrans had abandoned their borders, too weak to defend them. Victory would be swift, glory assured. Yet why did his heart beat unevenly? He glanced at Vara, who was whispering to a subordinate. Her face was taut, eyes narrowed at the displays. "Something troubles you, Lieutenant?" he asked, his tone lighter than he felt. She straightened. It's just the silence, sir. It's unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Kethvar nodded, masking his own unease. Storms we can weather. This is opportunity. But inwardly he wondered. In his long career, he had faced enemies who fought with ferocity, but never one who hid in shadows. The humans, from what little was known, were a paradoxical species, capable of great destruction and profound creation. Their history spoke of wars that scorched planets, yet also of art that captured the soul's essence. And their faith, rumors of a singular god, an omnipotent force they believed guided them. Absurd, Kethvar thought. The Narn worshipped strength, not myths. Hours passed as the fleet delved deeper. The Sol system's outer reaches unfolded, gas giants with swirling storms, icy comets trailing ethereal tales, beauty in desolation. Kethvar found himself drawn to a viewport, watching a comet streak by. Magnificent, he murmured. In that moment a stray thought, this can't be mere accident. The precision of orbits, the dance of celestial bodies, it felt designed as if by a master artisan. He shook his head. Superstition bred weakness. A junior officer approached, saluting sharply. Admiral, we've intercepted faint transmissions. Old Terran broadcasts looping from automated relays. Play them, Kethvar commanded. The speakers crackled to life with voices, human voices, speaking in tongues translated by the ship's AI. Laughter, music, stories of heroism. One caught his ear, a tale of a small band of humans defying an invading force, their leader praying before battle. Not by our strength alone, the voice said, but by the grace of the Almighty. Kethvar snorted. Grace? What grace allowed empires to fall? But as the broadcast faded, a sensor alert pinged. Anomaly detected, Admiral. A derelict vessel adrift. Visual, he ordered. The screen flickered to show a ship, ancient Terran design, hull pitted but intact. No life signs. Board it, Kethvar said, curiosity overriding caution. Let's see what secrets it holds. A shuttle dispatched, Marines streaming aboard. Through helmet cams, Kethvar watched them navigate dark corridors, lights piercing the gloom. Consoles frozen, logs intact. The team leader's voice crackled. Admiral, the crew, they're gone. No bodies, no struggle. Just vanished, vanished. The word sent a ripple through the bridge. Vara's eyes met his, wide with unspoken fear. Kethvar's mind whirled. Coincidence, or the first whisper of those consequences. Retrieve the logs and return, he said, voice firm. But as the shuttle docked, he felt the weight of eyes upon him, not his crew's, but something vast unseen. The universe, perhaps, or that quiet intelligence the humans revered. The logs revealed little, a scouting mission, entering Sol, then static. Kethvar paced, thoughts churning. Internal conflict gnawed, pride versus prudence. Retreat, unthinkable. Press on, reckless. But the Emperor's command echoed. He chose defiance. Full ahead, he ordered. The Terrans play games, we end them. As the fleet surged forward, a distant star twinkled as if winking in approval or warning. Kethvar ignored it, but in his heart doubt took root, and in the silence of space something stirred, a consequence awakening. The fleet pressed deeper into Sol's outer shell, engines thrumming like the heartbeat of a dying god. Admiral Kethvar had not slept in 31 hours. He told himself it was vigilance, not fear, that kept his eyes open, but the truth tasted metallic on his tongue like blood from a bitten cheek. On the main holodable, the system unfolded in cold cyan light, Neptune's pale azure disk sliding past a port, Triton's frozen canyons glinting beneath a paper-thin atmosphere. No mines. No defense grids, no welcoming fleet, only silence so complete it rang in the bones. Lieutenant Vara approached, her claws clicking softly on the deck plating. Admiral, the boarding team has finished analyzing the derelict's logs. She hesitated, tail curling. The final entry is strange. Play it, Kethvar said, voice flat. The bridge speakers crackled. A human voicemail, calm almost to the point of serenity, spoke in archaic universal trade. Day 217. We crossed the line at 14:07 ship time. Nothing happened, then everything did. The stars went out one by one, not eclipsed, just gone. We thought it was a sensor fault. It was. If anyone finds this, tell our families we tried to turn back. Tell them we prayed. Tell them he answered, just not the way we expected. Static swallowed the rest. A junior comms officer laughed nervously. Humans and their ghost stories. Kethvar did not laugh. He stared at the frozen timestamp, 4729 GE, 283 years ago. The ship had been drifting in a perfect orbit ever since, untouched by micrometeorites, untouched by time. Delete the file, he ordered, and scrub it from every backup. He saw the shock on Vara's face. Superstition spreads faster than plasma fire, he added, quieter. We will not feed it. But the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Hours bled into one another. The fleet passed Uranus without incident, then Saturn's rings, glittering like shattered glass around a golden titan. Kethvar stood at the forward viewport, watching the rings slide by in slow, majestic arcs. For a moment the beauty of it pierced him. Not the beauty of conquest, but something older, something that made his chest ache with an emotion the Narn language had no name for. He remembered his mate again, her voice soft in the memory. Look at the stars long enough, Keth, and you'll feel watched. He had laughed then, he did not laugh now. Admiral, the sensor chief called, voice cracking. We're picking up something. Kethvar turned. Define something. Energy signatures, not weapons, not shields, it's everywhere. Like the vacuum itself is glowing, but only on frequencies we've never cataloged before. Show me. The main screen shifted to a false color overlay. Space itself shimmered with faint gold threads, weaving in and out of visibility, forming an immense lattice that cradled the entire inner system. It was not a net. It was too delicate, too perfect. It looked grown, not built. Vara whispered, "It's beautiful." Kethvar felt his scales prickle. Beautiful things could kill you faster than ugly ones. Distance to the lattice, he demanded. 0, we're already inside it. A collective intake of breath swept the bridge. Any effect on systems? He asked. Negative, shields nominal, weapons hot, life support steady, it's ignoring us. Kethvar stared at the golden web. It pulsed, slow as breathing. He thought of the human prayer again. He answered, just not the way we expected. Launch a probe, he said. I want a sample of that energy. The probe streaked forward on silent thrusters. It crossed one of the golden filaments and simply ceased. No explosion, no debris. One moment the probe was there, telemetry streaming cleanly. The next, the feed ended as if someone had switched off a light. The bridge went still. Kethvar felt the first real spike of fear, cold and sharp, sliding between his ribs. He crushed it. Recall all probes, he said. Titan formation, we move as one. Vara stepped closer, voice low so only he could hear. Sir, we are inside something. We have been since the border. Whatever this is, it let us in. Kethvar met her eyes. For the first time in decades, he had no clever retort. He turned back to the viewport. Saturn's rings were gone now. Ahead lay Jupiter, vast and banded in creams and rusts, storms swirling like the thoughts in his skull. A new alert chimed, soft, almost polite. Incoming transmission, comms reported. Audio only, it's in Narnish. Kethvar's claws dug into the railing. Patch it through. A voice filled the bridge, male, human, gentle as falling ash. You were warned. That was all. Then silence again, deeper than before. Every officer turned to the admiral. Kethvar felt the weight of 1,000 gazes. Pride roared in him. I will not yield to phantoms. But beneath it, something older whispered, you already have. He straightened, scales flaring with forced bravado. Battle stations, he barked. Charge all weapons. If the humans want to play ghosts, we will burn their haunt to cinders. Alarms wailed crimson. Throughout the fleet, crews scrambled, claws flying across consoles, plasma coils howling to life. Yet even as the Eternal Dominion lit up like a star gone to war, Kethvar felt the golden lattice tighten just slightly like a breath drawn in. On the main screen, Jupiter loomed larger, and somewhere behind its swirling clouds, something vast and patient turned its attention toward them. Far away, on a small blue world still hidden beyond the gas giant's shoulder, a single church bell began to ring, though no human hand pulled the rope. And in the cold between stars, the humans waited, not with weapons raised, but with heads bowed. Admiral Kethvar felt the deck tremble beneath his claws, not from engines, not from weapons fire, but from something deeper, as if the ship itself had begun to shiver. The fleet was at battle stations. Every cannon sang with pent-up plasma. Every shield node glowed white-hot. 112 capital ships formed a perfect wedge, the Eternal Dominion at its apex, prowling toward Jupiter like a predator that had finally scented blood. Yet nothing came to meet them. No interceptors, no orbital fortresses, only the golden lattice, now visibly brighter, threading through the void like veins of living sunlight. Range to Jupiter's magnetosphere, Kethvar asked, voice carved from stone. 43 minutes at current velocity, Vara replied. She had not left his side since the human voice spoke. Her tail no longer twitched, it hung still, the way a soldier's does when he knows the next breath might be his last. Good, Kethvar said. We will be in optimum firing range in 39. On my mark, the entire fleet will unload every weapon we have into the upper atmosphere. If the humans are hiding behind their gas giant, we will boil their refuge away. A few officers exchanged glances. Boiling away part of a planet's atmosphere was not warfare, it was annihilation, but none spoke. The Narn way was obedience or death, and death felt closer than it ever had. Kethvar turned to the tactical console himself, fingers dancing across controls. He selected targeting parameters, wide dispersal, maximum yield, overlapping fields of fire. Enough energy to turn Jupiter's great red spot into a second sun. He was about to give the order when the stars went out. Not metaphorically, they simply stopped. One heartbeat, the forward viewport showed the familiar scatter of diamond points against black. The next, there was only a wall of absolute darkness, as though a curtain had fallen across the universe. Every external light source vanished. Jupiter disappeared. The golden lattice disappeared. Even the running lights of the escort cruisers blinking 100 kilometers off the port bow winked out as if snuffed by unseen fingers. Emergency lighting snapped on inside the bridge, bathing everything in blood-red gloom. For 3 full seconds no one spoke. Then chaos. Sensor failure. External cameras blind. We've lost the fleet net. Every ship just dropped off comms. Kethvar slammed a fist on the console. Stabilize. Artificial gravity still online. Life support. Both green, sir, someone answered, voice trembling. But we're not moving. He felt it then. The subliminal thrum of the engines had vanished. Inertial dampeners reported zero acceleration. The Eternal Dominion, a million-ton fortress of war, hung suspended as motionless as a painting. Helm full reverse, he ordered. The helmsman's claws flew across controls. Engines at 100%, sir. No thrust, no vector change. It's like we're nailed to space itself. Vara's whisper cut through the rising panic. Admiral, look, she pointed to the main viewport. Where absolute darkness had reigned moments before, a single point of light now burned, small, steady, impossibly white. It grew slowly, resolving into the shape of a man, not a ship, not a hologram. A human male standing in the vacuum as though it were solid ground, arms relaxed at his sides, barefoot, dressed in simple gray cloth. No suit, no helmet. His chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm of breathing. He was 30 meters away, close enough that Kethvar could see the texture of the fabric, the faint stubble on his jaw, the calm in his dark eyes. Every weapon turret on the Eternal Dominion swiveled instinctively, tracking the impossible figure. Plasma coils screamed, ready to fire. The man lifted one hand, palm forward, the universal gesture for stop, and every weapon on the flagship went cold. Power readings flatlined across the board. The coils cooled so fast frost bloomed along the barrels. Inside the bridge, breath misted in the sudden chill. The man spoke. His voice arrived not through speakers, but directly inside every mind aboard, gentle, accented with an ancient Earth dialect none of them should have understood, yet all did. You were warned, he repeated, exactly as before. Then softer, turn back. Kethvar found his voice. Identify yourself. The man smiled, small and sad. Just a watchman. By what authority do you? By the authority that set the stars in their courses, the watchman said. By the authority that lets children sleep safely under alien suns. By the authority that still offers mercy even when it is refused. Kethvar felt rage rise, hot and clean. We are the Narn Empire. We do not kneel to shadows and parlor tricks. The watchman's eyes never left Kethvar's. You mistake the shadow for the one who casts it. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Somewhere on a lower deck, a young engineer began to weep uncontrollably. No one hushed him. Vara stepped forward until her snout nearly touched the transparasteel. What did you do to the stars? She asked, voice raw. I closed your eyes, the watchman answered, so you would finally open them. He gestured, and suddenly the darkness peeled away like theater curtains. The stars returned. Jupiter returned. The fleet returned, every ship exactly where it had been, yet every chronometer aboard now read the same impossible time, 000000. They had lost 7 minutes and 33 seconds. No one remembered them. Kethvar stared at the watchman, hearts hammering against his ribs. Pride and terror warred inside him, ancient enemies tearing at the fabric of who he was. He could order the fleet to fire anyway, weapons cold or not. He could vent his fury into the void. He could die defiant, or he could do the thing no Narn admiral had ever done. He could choose. The watchman waited, patient as stone. Kethvar's claws opened and closed. He thought of his mate's voice again, soft in memory. Look at the stars long enough, Keth, and you'll feel watched. He felt watched now, not by the human floating in vacuum, by something far larger, far quieter, whose attention pressed against the hull like deep ocean against a submarine. The silence on the bridge became unbearable. Finally, Kethvar spoke, and his voice cracked like thin ice. Fleet-wide channel, open. The comms officer obeyed, hands shaking. Kethvar drew a breath that tasted of fear and something purer. All ships, reverse course. Maximum safe speed. We are leaving Sol. A ripple of shock passed through the bridge. Vara's eyes widened, but she said nothing. The watchman inclined his head, the smallest bow of respect. Then he was simply gone as though he had never been. Power returned instantly. Engines roared back to life. The golden lattice dimmed, threads fading like dawn mist. The fleet turned, 112 warships wheeling in perfect synchronization, and began the long retreat toward the border. No one cheered, no one spoke. Kethvar stood at the viewport watching Jupiter shrink behind them, its storms swirling on, indifferent. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean. Vara approached, voice barely above a whisper. Sir, do you believe it now, that there is something greater? Kethvar did not answer for a long time. Then so quietly only she heard. I don't know what I believe, but I know what I felt. Far behind them, unseen, the watchman watched the Narn fleet flee. He lifted his eyes to the small blue dot still hidden beyond the sun's glare, and he smiled the way a shepherd smiles when the last lamb finally chooses the gate. And somewhere on that blue dot, in a quiet room lit only by candlelight, an old woman closed her prayer book and whispered, They turned back, thank you. But out in the dark, one Narn cruiser, the Silent Reaper, did not turn. Its captain, ambitious and faithless, had muted his comms the moment the order came. He held course alone toward the inner system, and the watchman's smile faded. The Silent Reaper slid through the dark like a dagger slipped between ribs. Captain Dralkith commanded her from a dimmed bridge where every light had been killed except the red glow of tactical displays. His crew moved in silence, claws wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, breath shallow. They had severed themselves from the fleet net the instant Kethvar's retreat order crackled across the void. No acknowledgements, no beacons, just the soft click of a mute switch and the sudden, exhilarating taste of treason. Eth was younger than the Admiral by 30 cycles, leaner, hungrier. His scales still carried the deep indigo of youth, unmarred by the pale scars of old campaigns. He had watched Kethvar's humiliation through a private feed and felt nothing but contempt. The great Admiral, broken by a single human ghost and a handful of parlor tricks, pathetic. Status, he hissed. Golden lattice is thinning ahead, Captain, the sensor officer whispered. We're past Jupiter's orbit. Mars is visible on long range. The blue world is 92 minutes away at current burn. Eth allowed himself a thin smile. Then in 92 minutes, the Narn Empire claims its richest prize while the coward limps home with tales of phantoms. He leaned over the helm, claws drumming. Stealth coils at maximum. If the humans want to play invisible, we will be more invisible still. The Silent Reaper was built for this. Angular, black as obsidian, engines tuned to whisper instead of roar. She carried no escort, no tenders, just Marines, boarding torpedoes, and enough nuclear demolition charges to crack continental plates. Dralkith's plan was elegant in its brutality. Drop out of supercruise inside Terran orbital space, seize a major settlement before they could react, plant a flag, and dare the Empire to disown the victory. He had studied the old records. Every invasion that vanished had come in force, announcing itself with arrogance. Eth would come alone, silent, surgical. One ship could not trigger whatever mythic defense had swallowed armadas. One ship would be beneath notice. He was wrong. The first sign was the stars again, but this time they did not vanish. They rearranged. Constellations Dralkith had known since hatching slid sideways, forming new patterns that hurt to look at directly. The crew noticed one by one. A navigator began to retch. Another clawed at his own eyes, muttering about shapes that had too many angles. Discipline. Eth snarled, but his voice cracked on the second syllable. The ship's chronometers began to disagree. The bridge clock read 47:12. The engine room reported 47:44. Life support claimed it was still 46:59. Time was coming apart at the seams. Then the watchman returned. He did not appear outside this time. He stepped out of the air at the rear of the bridge, barefoot on the deck plating as though he had always been there. The same gray cloth, the same calm eyes. Only now he carried something in his hands, a simple clay oil lamp, flame burning steady in hard vacuum, casting warm gold across the terrified faces of the Narn crew. Dralkith's sidearm was out before thought, plasma muzzle flaring violet. He fired 3 times, center mass. The bolts passed through the watchman and melted craters in the far bulkhead. The human never flinched. Captain Eth of the Silent Reaper, the watchman said, voice soft, sorrowful. You were offered mercy with the rest. You spat on it. Eth felt his heart stutter. The human knew his name, knew the ship had always known. Helm evasive, get us out of here, he roared. The helmsman slammed controls. Nothing happened. The Silent Reaper continued on the same vector, same speed, as though locked in invisible rails. The watchman lifted the lamp higher. In its small circle of light, every crew member saw their own reflection in the polished clay. Only the reflections were older, scarred, dying in fire and vacuum, mouths open in silent screams. One Marine dropped his rifle and began to pray in the old Narn tongue, the one reserved for hatchlings and deathbeds. Eth felt something he had never felt before, the cold certainty that he was already dead and simply waiting for the universe to notice. The watchman's eyes found his. You wanted to see what happens to those who refuse the warning, he said. Very well, he blew out the lamp. Darkness fell, absolute and crushing, but it was not empty. In that darkness Dralkith heard singing, not loud, not triumphant, just a single male voice, human, coming from everywhere and nowhere, singing an ancient melody in a language that predated starflight. The notes were slow, mournful, and beneath them ran a rhythm like a heartbeat. With the singing came memory, not his own. He saw Terra from orbit, blue and white and impossibly fragile. He saw cities reduced to glowing wounds by wars humanity fought against itself long before the stars were reached. He saw children born in fallout shelters who never saw the sun, yet still laughed. He saw scientists on their knees in the ruins, praying for wisdom instead of power. He saw the moment, centuries ago, when humanity looked at the abyss of its own making and chose something different. He saw them build not walls, but consequences, and he understood with the clarity of a drowning man breaking the surface one last time that the golden lattice was not a weapon, it was a promise kept. The song reached its final phrase. Light returned. The Silent Reaper hung alone in high orbit above a night-side Earth, directly over a continent shaped like a boot. Below, the planet turned slowly oblivious. Cities glittered like scattered diamonds along dark coastlines. No alarms. No defense fleets rising to meet him, just the quiet turning of a world that refused to be afraid. Dralkith's claws opened. His sidearm clattered to the deck. Every screen on the bridge now showed the same image. The watchman standing in front of the main viewport, lamp relit, flame steady. I will not kill you, the watchman said quietly. That choice was never mine to make, but neither will I let you harm them. He stepped forward until he stood among them, real enough that the heat of the lamp warmed the air. "Look," he said, and turned every crew member's head with a gentle, invisible touch. They looked out the viewport. The stars were moving again, but not randomly this time. They were flowing together, coalescing into a colossal figure that stood behind the silent reaper, taller than worlds. Not solid, not energy, just presence made visible. Arms outstretched, palms forward, exactly as the watchman had done earlier. And every Narn aboard felt the same word form in their minds, not spoken, simply known enough. Dralkith dropped to his knees. The sound of it echoed like a bell in the sudden hush. Tears, actual tears, cut tracks through the dust on his scales. He had never cried, not once in all his years of war. The watchman placed a hand on his crest, light as a father's. "You still have a soul, Dralkith. Barely. Guard it." Then the lamp went out again and the watchman was gone. The silent reaper found herself suddenly free, engines responsive, weapons cold but functional. Earth spun beneath, serene and untouchable. Eth rose slowly. His voice when it came was hoarse. "Set course for the border, maximum speed, do not stop for anything." No one argued. As the cruiser turned, burning hard for the outer system, the captain stared back at the blue world until it was only a bright star again. He whispered a single word, the first prayer of his life, in a language he did not know he knew. "Forgive." Far behind, the watchman stood on nothing and watched the lone ship flee. He was weeping too, and on the night side of Earth, in 1,000 quiet places, candles that had been burning since the intrusion began flickered once, then settled into steady flame again. The lattice dimmed to its ancient watch. All across the system, church bells that had never rung before tolled 9 times in perfect unison, then fell silent. The Sol system exhaled, but out in the dark, something older than stars stirred, patient, vast, and turned its gaze toward the fleeing Narn Empire. Because mercy had been given twice, there would not be a third. The Narn fleet limped toward the border in perfect silence. No one spoke on open channels. No one sang victory songs. 111 ships, one missing, quietly erased from the roster, moved in a ragged sphere, shields down, weapons cold, engines burning only hard enough to keep formation. They looked less like conquerors now and more like refugees fleeing a storm they could not name. Admiral Kethvar had not left the bridge in 72 hours. He stood at the forward viewport, staring back toward Sol the way a man stares at the door he has just closed on a burning house. The inner system was only a bright star now, the sun itself, but he could still feel its weight on his scales. The memory of the watchman's eyes refused to fade. Lieutenant Vara approached with a steaming cup of kava, strong, bitter, the closest thing Narn had to a ritual of comfort. She offered it without a word. Kethvar took it, claws trembling just enough that the liquid sloshed. He drank anyway, scalding his tongue, welcoming the pain. "He let us go," Vara said at last, voice barely above the hum of life support. Kethvar's laugh was a dry, broken thing. "He didn't let us go, Vara. He sent us away. There's a difference." She studied his face. "You look smaller, sir." He met her gaze, golden eyes dulled with exhaustion. "I feel smaller." Behind them, the bridge crew pretended to work. In truth, they were listening, hungry for any scrap of meaning that might stitch the tear in their universe. Kethvar set the cup down untouched after the first swallow. "Open a fleet-wide channel. Encrypted. My authority only." Vara hesitated, then obeyed. When the circuit chimed ready, Kethvar spoke, and every speaker on every ship carried his voice. "This is the Admiral. You will hear rumors. You will hear lies. You will hear that we fled from shadows. Let me tell you what actually happened. We met something older than empires. We met something that could have erased us the way you or I would swat an insect. It chose not to. I do not yet understand why, but I will spend whatever remains of my life trying. When we return to Narn Prime, I will stand before the Emperor and I will speak the truth. I expect to be stripped of rank, tried for cowardice, and executed. That is my burden. Yours is simpler. Live differently. Remember the blue world that refused to raise a single weapon against us. Remember the voice that offered mercy when annihilation was a thought away. Remember that strength is not always measured in plasma yields. Some of you will call this weakness. Some of you will call it madness. I call it the first honest day I have lived in 50 years. He closed the channel. The silence that followed was so complete that the soft click of the circuit breaking sounded like a gunshot. Vara's eyes were wet. She did not bother hiding it. Tears on a Narn face were rare enough that no one would dare comment. Kethvar turned back to the viewport. "How long until the border?" 14 hours, sir." He nodded once. 14 hours to decide what kind of creature he would be when he crossed that invisible line again, this time outward. He thought of the human watchman barefoot in vacuum, the clay lamp burning where no flame should burn. He thought of the colossal figure made of rearranged stars, arms outstretched, wordless but unmistakable, enough. And for the first time since hatching, Kethvar prayed. He did not know to whom. He had no words, no ritual. He simply opened his mind the way a child opens a hand and let the ache pour out. Somewhere aft in the Marine barracks, a young sergeant was doing the same, whispering the human word he had overheard in the watchman's presence: forgive. One by one, then in clusters, then in waves, Narn across the fleet began to pray, some silently, some aloud, some in languages their ancestors had forgot. No one ordered it. No one coordinated it. It simply happened the way breathing happens when you remember you've been holding your breath for centuries. In the engine room of the cruiser Iron Resolve, Chief Engineer Talzek, a veteran of a dozen campaigns who had once laughed at the idea of gods, found himself on his knees between plasma conduits, forehead pressed to the warm deck, whispering, I saw it, and I'm sorry. The golden lattice did not reappear. It did not need to. Its work, for now, was done. 13 hours later, the fleet crossed the border buoys again. The automated warnings still broadcast their ancient message, turn back or face consequences. This time no one muted them. They listened all the way through in every language until the final line in Narnish faded into static. Then as one, the fleet cut engines and drifted. Kethvar ordered every external floodlight turned on, not weapons, not beacons, just light. 111 warships lit up like a constellation of repentant stars, shining back toward Saul in wordless apology. They stayed that way for a full hour. No one timed it. No one needed to. When at last they turned for home, the mood aboard was no longer shame, but something fragile and luminous, something that felt almost like hope. Far behind them, on a quiet hill in the Italian countryside, an old priest stepped out of his chapel at dawn. He had been awake all night, candle stubs burned to nubs, rosary worn smooth between his fingers. He looked up at the sky where the last faint gleam of the Narn floodlights was just winking out beyond the atmosphere. He smiled, made the sign of the cross toward the heavens, and said softly, Well done, children, well done. Then he went inside to ring the bell for morning mass, but out past the border, racing ahead of the fleet on silent wings, a single Terran probe, small, unmarked, ancient beyond reckoning, followed at a distance no sensor could detect. It carried no weapons. It carried a message, and it was bound for Narn Prime, because mercy had been accepted once. Now came the consequences of that acceptance. And somewhere in the deep, the watchman watched the probe's silver arrow streak across the dark, and he nodded once, slow, solemn, proud. The long war that had never quite begun was finally ending, but another story, quieter, truer, and far more dangerous, was only just starting. The probe arrived without ceremony. No trumpet of war, no herald fleet. Just a silver needle no longer than a man's forearm, slipping through the outer pickets of Narn Prime's defense grid as though the grid were missed. It ignored hails, ignored targeting locks, ignored the frantic plasma volleys that lit the night side of the capital world like brief, angry suns. Every shot passed through it or missed by the width of a prayer. On the surface, in the imperial palace of crimson spires, the Emperor of the Narn felt the first chill of true fear in his long and blood-soaked reign. He was ancient by their measure, scales dulled to ash gray, eyes milky with age yet still sharp enough to cut throats across a council table. He sat on a throne carved from the skull of a leviathan his grandfather had slain, surrounded by the high admirals who had not accompanied the Saul expedition. They were already sharpening their arguments. Kethvar's failure would be the blade that ended his line. Then the lights in the throne room dimmed of their own accord. Every holoscreen flared white, then resolved into a single image, the watchman, not a recording, alive, present. He stood in the center of the throne room as though he had stepped through the marble floor itself, barefoot, gray cloth stirring in a wind no one felt. The clay lamp was in his hand again, flame steady, casting gold across the Emperor's withered snout. Every guard in the chamber raised weapons. Every weapon died in the same heartbeat. The Emperor rose slowly, joints creaking like old iron. His voice, when it came, still carried the gravel of command. You trespass on the heart of the Narn Empire, human. The watchman inclined his head, neither servile nor defiant. I stand where I am invited, he said, and you invited me the moment you sent your fleet to Saul. A ripple of snarls passed through the admirals. One lunged, claws extended. He froze mid-leap, suspended in air, eyes wide with sudden understanding. The watchman never looked at him. The Emperor's tail lashed. Speak your purpose and be quick. I have no patience for ghosts. My purpose is mercy, the watchman replied, and judgment. They are not always separate. He lifted the lamp higher. In its small circle of light, every Narn in the room saw the same vision. The Saul system, not as conquerors had imagined it, empty, ripe, defenseless, but as it truly was. They saw the golden lattice, threads now blazing like solar flares, woven so tightly that nothing larger than a thought could pass without permission. They saw the watchman, not one, but many, human forms standing on nothing, scattered across the dark between worlds, patient as mountains. They saw Earth blue and alive, cities glowing softly beneath auroras that danced in shapes of ancient scripture. And they saw, for one shattering instant, the colossal figure behind it all, stars for eyes, galaxies for a cloak, arms still outstretched in the same gesture. Enough. The vision ended as gently as breath. Suspended Admiral dropped to his knees, weeping blood from his eyes. The Emperor did not kneel, but his claws dug so deeply into the arms of his throne that stone cracked. The watchman spoke again, softer now, almost tender. Your fleet was spared because one man chose humility over pride. Admiral Kethvar is coming home to face your justice. Will you give him death, or will you give him a future? The Emperor's voice was a rasp. You threat me in my own hall. I offer you a choice, the watchman said. The same choice we offered at the border. You may execute Kethvar and every soul who sailed with him. You may call them cowards, erase their names, and prepare the next fleet larger, angrier, certain of victory this time. Or you may listen, because the next time a Narn ship crosses that line there will be no warning, no watchman, no mercy, only consequences. He set the clay lamp on the floor between them. It stayed lit, though nothing fed the flame. This burns with oil from a tree that grew on Golgotha, he said. It has burned for 2,000 years without being consumed. Take it as a gift if you have the courage to receive gifts, or smash it and we will understand each other perfectly. Silence stretched, thick enough to choke on. The emperor stared at the small flame. He saw his empire reflected there, 1,000 conquered worlds, rivers of blood, mountains of bones, and for the first time in his life he felt small. One of the younger admirals, scales still bright with ambition, hissed, "We do not bargain with prey." The watchman turned to him, and the admiral, aged 50 years in a heartbeat, scales flaking to gray, eyes clouding, body crumpling to dust before he hit the floor. No one moved to help him. The watchman faced the emperor again. "Kethvar will arrive in 9 days. What you do with him will decide what becomes of your people. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon." He stepped backward 1 step, 2, and was simply gone. The lamp remained. The throne room stank of ozone and terror. For a long while no one spoke. Then the emperor, ancient, terrible, undefeated until this moment, did the only thing left to a creature who has finally met something larger than himself. He descended the 3 steps from his throne. He knelt, and with trembling claws he lifted the lamp. Far away in the approaching fleet, Kethvar, who had been staring at nothing for hours, suddenly straightened in his chair. He felt it, a warmth in his chest like sunrise after endless night. He knew, without knowing how, that the message had been delivered. Vara saw the change in him. "Sir," Kethvar's voice was steady for the first time since Jupiter. "They heard us," he said. "Now we will see what kind of empire we truly serve." On earth in 1,000 languages and none, prayers of thanksgiving rose like incense. The watchman stood on a hillside in Galilee, lamp now dark in his hand, and looked up at the stars that were no longer needed as eyes. He smiled, tired and proud. Behind him, another figure approached, older, scarred, wearing the simple robe of a carpenter. The watchman bowed his head. "They chose the harder path," he said. The carpenter rested a hand on his shoulder. "They always do," he answered. "Eventually." And somewhere between the stars, the probe turned, empty now of its burden, and began the long journey home. But on Narn Prime, in the dead of night, the emperor carried the lamp through corridors no one else dared enter, and set it on a small stone table in his private chamber. He did not sleep again for many days. Instead he sat before the flame, watching it burn without fuel, and for the first time in 700 years he whispered a word his tongue had forgotten: "Please." 9 days later the fleet entered home orbit. Narn Prime turned beneath them, a world of crimson continents and black oceans, its skies forever bruised with volcanic ash. The spires of the capital rose like obsidian spears, and every one of them was draped in mourning banners of deep violet, the color reserved for the death of empires. Kethvar stood on the shuttle's ramp as it descended, wind whipping his cloak. He had not worn his admiral's insignia since Saul. Instead he wore plain gray, the color of penitence. His claws were unpolished, his crest unbraided. He looked like a common soldier awaiting execution. Behind him, rank upon rank of the returning crews stood in silence. No drums, no honor guard, only the low moan of atmospheric engines and the smell of burning fuel. The emperor waited on the grand landing plaza, alone. No courtiers, no admirals. Just the ancient monarch on a simple stone dais, the clay lamp burning steadily in his left claw. The flame had not flickered once in 9 days. When Kethvar's boots touched the ground, protocol demanded he kneel. He did without hesitation, forehead pressed to cold stone. The emperor's voice carried across the plaza, amplified not by technology but by the raw weight of centuries. "Rise, Kethvar, once admiral of the fleet." Kethvar rose. The emperor studied him for a long time. The plaza was so quiet the wind sounded like breathing. "You were sent to bring me a star system," the emperor said at last. "You return with empty claws and a story of ghosts." Kethvar met his gaze. "I return with the only thing worth bringing, majesty, a warning." A ripple passed through the watching millions. Screens across the planet carried the moment live. Many had come expecting blood. Some had come hoping for it. The emperor lifted the lamp so all could see the impossible flame. "This burns without oil," he said. "It has burned since the humans stood in my throne room. Tell me, Kethvar, what manner of creature can send fire that needs no fuel?" Kethvar's voice did not waver. "The same manner of creature who can stop a fleet with a word, who can rearrange the stars into a single sentence, who can look into a soul and find it wanting, yet still offer mercy." The emperor's tail twitched once, the only sign of turmoil in a body that had forgotten how to tremble. He descended the dais until he stood face to face with the man he had ordered to conquer or die. "Many here call for your execution," he said quietly, so only Kethvar heard. "They say you shamed the empire." Kethvar answered just as softly. "Then let them execute me, but first let them look into that flame and tell me what they see." The emperor's eyes, milky with age, suddenly sharpened. "I looked," he whispered. "I saw every world I burned, every child I orphaned. Every scream I called victory, and the flame did not go out." He stepped back. Then, before the eyes of a billion Narn, the emperor of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known did what no ruler had done in recorded history. He knelt, not to Kethvar, to the lamp, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked across the planet like breaking mountain ranges. People of Narn, for 700 years we have taken what we desired because we could. We called it strength. We were wrong. Strength is not the claw that severs. It is the hand that stays the blow when the blow is deserved. Today I declare the Sol system forever forbidden. Not out of fear, though we should be afraid, but out of reverence. Any ship, any probe, any whisper that crosses that border without invitation will be destroyed by our own hand before the consequences find us again. And let this day be remembered as the day of the flame. He rose, turned to Kethvar, and in full view of the Empire, removed the imperial signet from his own claw and pressed it into Kethvar's palm. "You will not die today," the Emperor said. "You will rule in my place when I am gone, because you are the only one among us who has seen the edge of the abyss and chosen to step back." Kethvar stared at the signet as though it burned worse than any plasma. "I am unworthy," he said, voice raw. "So are we all," the Emperor replied. "That is the point." A roar went up from the crews behind him, not the battle cry of conquerors, but something older, deeper. Thousands dropped to their knees. Some wept, some laughed through tears, some simply stared at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. High above, in orbit, the Eternal Dominion fired its maneuvering thrusters and turned its prow away from the inner system forever. On Earth, at that exact moment, every bell on the planet rang once, not in alarm, but in recognition. The watchman stood on the shore of a quiet lake in Galilee, lamp now dark and ordinary in his hand. He looked up as though he could see across the light years, and he smiled the small, tired smile of a soldier who has just watched the war end without a shot. Behind him, footsteps on the pebbles. The carpenter sat beside him, skipping stones across the water that had once known storms. "They chose wisely," the watchman said. "They always do," the carpenter answered, "when they finally run out of places to hide from themselves." The watchman looked at the dark lamp. "Will you take this back now?" The carpenter shook his head. "Leave it burning a little longer. They'll need the light." Far across the gulf, on Narn Prime, the Emperor carried the lamp into the deepest vault beneath the palace, a chamber that had once held trophies of genocide. He set it on a simple stone plinth. And there it burned day after day, year after year, long after the Emperor was dust and Kethvar's reign had turned the Empire from conquest to something strangers might one day call peace. Pilgrims came, not many at first, then more. They came to look into the flame and see what the Emperor had seen. Some left weeping, some left silent, a few left changed. And in the quiet nights, when the ash clouds parted and the stars looked down on a world learning how to be small again, young Narn would gather around the vault's open doors and listen to the old ones tell the story. How their pride once sailed to steal a star, and came home carrying a light no darkness could put out. But out past the heliopause of Sol, centuries later, a new probe, this one Narn built, small, humble, carrying no weapons, approached the border. It broadcast a single message in perfect, ancient Terran. "We remember, may we come in peace." And somewhere in the dark the watchman heard. He looked to the carpenter, who was mending a net under starlight. The carpenter smiled and nodded. The golden lattice parted just wide enough for one small ship, and the universe, for the first time in a long time, felt a little less broken. 137 years later, the ship that crossed the border was called Quiet Flame. It was not a warship. It was barely a ship at all, a slender white needle of ceramic and prayer, 300 meters stem to stern, crewed by 37 souls, half Narn, half human. No weapons, no shields worth mentioning. Only a single small clay lamp burning in a glass shrine at the vessel's heart, fed by oil carried all the way from Earth. Captain Elias Kethvar, great-grandson of the admiral who once turned back in terror, stood on the open bridge, claws and human hands clasped behind his back. He was a hybrid of both peoples, scaled skin the color of deep twilight, eyes the warm brown of old Terra, crest braided with the simple cord of a penitent rather than the gold of rank. Beside him stood Sister Miriam Okonkwo, descendant of Nigerian missionaries and the first human abbess ordained on Narn Prime. She wore plain gray, the same color Kethvar's ancestor had chosen for his return. They did not speak as the quiet flame slid past the ancient buoys. They did not need to. Every soul aboard was praying in whatever language their heart had learned. The golden lattice parted for them like curtains of sunrise. No watchman appeared. None was needed. They had been expected for a very long time. Mars greeted them first, red, silent, ancient cities glowing beneath glass domes that had never known war. Then the asteroid belt, where silent habitats drifted like pearls on black silk. Then Jupiter, vast and serene, its storms now harnessed to power cathedrals that orbited in the clouds. And finally, on the long, slow spiral in, the blue world itself. Earth. Elias felt his throat close. He had seen hollows, paintings, the memories of his human grandmother, but nothing prepared him for the living reality. Oceans catching sunlight like liquid sapphire, clouds swirling in slow, deliberate spirals, green continents breathing. Sister Miriam laid a hand on his scaled forearm. Breathe, child, she whispered. It's only home. He laughed once, a sound halfway between a Narn rumble and a human sob. The quiet flame was met not by warships, but by a single small shuttle, open-hulled, painted white. Aboard it stood one man, barefoot, gray cloth, dark hair stirring in the solar wind. The watchman, older now or perhaps timeless, smile lines deeper, eyes still gentle enough to break empires. He stepped across the void without a suit and stood on the quiet flame's outer hull as though it were solid ground. The entire crew came on deck, Narn and human together, and knelt. The watchman shook his head. Stand up, your guests, not prisoners. They rose slowly. He walked among them, touching a shoulder here, a crest there, greeting each by the name their mother had whispered in the dark. When he reached Elias and Miriam, he rested a hand on each of their heads. You kept the flame burning, he said to Elias. You taught us how, Elias answered, voice thick. The watchman turned to Miriam. And you carried water to a desert people. They were thirsty, she said simply. He laughed then, the sound of bells across still water, and opened his arms. The crew rushed into the embrace, scales against skin, claws careful of fragile flesh, tears falling in zero-G like scattered diamonds. Later, much later, they would tell the story of that first day, how the watchman led them down through the atmosphere in the open shuttle. No engines, no heat shield, just gentle descent on wings of unseen wind. How they landed on a green hillside outside Nazareth where olive trees still grew from roots older than starflight. How the watchman took bread and wine from a simple wooden table beneath the trees and broke the bread, saying, This is how you were welcomed once. Remember. How every Narn present tasted bread for the first time and wept because it tasted like forgiveness. How the carpenter himself, no longer needing to hide his face, walked among them that evening, touching scarred crests and human cheeks alike, calling each by name. But the moment that would be carved into the stone of both worlds happened at dusk. The watchman led Elias and Miriam to the crest of the hill. Below them, the lights of new joint settlements were coming on, Narn spires of black glass beside whitewashed human villages, minarets and cathedrals sharing the same skyline. He handed Elias the original clay lamp, the one that had burned on Narn Prime for 137 years. It's time, he said. Time for what? Elias asked. The watchman pointed to a small stone cairn nearby. At its base was an empty niche, perfectly lamp-shaped. Time to bring it home. Elias knelt and set the lamp into the place prepared before the first Narn ever looked at the stars. The moment it settled, the flame, which had never once guttered in all those years, flared once, bright as a sunrise, then settled into a steady, ordinary glow. The watchman exhaled, long and slow, as though a burden of centuries had finally been laid down. Miriam asked quietly, What happens now? The watchman looked at the sky where the quiet flame still orbited, lights warm and welcoming. Now, he said, you stop being exiles and invaders. Now you become family. He turned to leave, but Elias caught his sleeve, scaled fingers trembling. Will we see you again? The watchman smiled, the same small, sad, proud smile he had worn the day he turned an armada with a single word. Every time you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it, he said. Every time you choose mercy when power would be easier. Every time you look at a stranger, scaled or smooth, and see a brother. He touched Elias' crest, then Miriam's cheek. I never really left. Then he walked down the hill toward the lights of the village, footsteps leaving no prints in the grass. Halfway down he was joined by the carpenter, who slung an arm around his shoulders like an old friend after a long campaign. Together they disappeared among the olive trees. Behind them on the hill, the lamp kept burning, quiet, steady, ordinary now. And for the first time since humanity had looked up and seen only itself in the mirror of the dark, the Sol system was no longer a fortress. It was a hearth, far away on Narn Prime in the great vault beneath the palace. The pedestal where the lamp had once stood was empty. But every Narn child knew the story, and every night before sleep, they looked toward Sol's distant light and whispered the same prayer their great-grandparents had learned from a broken admiral. Thank you for letting us come home. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, the answer came not in words, but in the simple, vast certainty that they had never truly been turned away, only waited for. Centuries after the quiet flame came home, the galaxy forgot the old fear. Sol and Narn Prime stood at the center of a quiet federation of worlds, black spires beside white cathedrals, scaled children and smooth-skinned ones chasing each other through gardens that smelled of both crimson ashflowers and Terran olives. The clay lamp still burned on its hill outside Nazareth, fed now by a child every dawn, human one day, Narn the next, an unbroken chain of small hands and smaller hearts. The galaxy had moved on. Then the Devourer came. No one knew its true name. It had eaten stars before language was born. It crossed the galactic rim like a hole torn in the night, swallowing light, heat, memory. Whole sectors went dark. Civilizations that had never heard of mercy or pride simply ceased, leaving only perfect spheres of absolute nothing where suns once shone. The Joint Council of Terra and Narn met in the Great Nave on Luna, a cathedral built half in gravity, half in vacuum, stained glass glowing against starlight. Old arguments flared: evacuate, negotiate, fight. In the end, they did what their ancestors had learned to do when all choices looked like death. They prayed, and they built a fleet. Not the largest ever assembled, there were once bigger. Not the most advanced, there were once deadlier. Just the one that carried every lamp they could spare. 2,000 ships, some sleek white needles descended from the quiet flame, some obsidian wedges that still bore the crests of a warlike past. Crewed by millions, human, Narn, and every people who had joined the quiet Federation since the day of the flame. No planet killers, no superweapons. Only lamps, clay, glass, crystal, carved from the bones of dead moons, each one lit from the original flame on the Galilean hill. They called the fleet Lantern. Admiral Jonah Kethvarakonquo, direct descendant of both the admiral who turned back and the abbess who taught a desert people to sing, stood on the open bridge of the flagship Remember Mercy. He was old for space, 211 Terran years, scales silvered at the edges, eyes still bright with the brown of his human blood. Beside him stood Prior Elijah, a Narn monk whose crest had been shaved bare in the old style of penitence. Between them burned the original clay lamp, carried from Earth in a simple glass case. They met the Devourer at the edge of the Perseus arm. It was not a battle. There is no word for what it was. The Devourer filled half the sky, a sphere of absence so complete it bent perception. Ships that crossed its event horizon simply forgot they had ever existed. No wreckage, no screams. Just the soft, terrible sound of history being erased. Lantern formed a perfect sphere of light around the monster. Every external floodlight, every running lamp, every porthole glowed. 2,000 ships became a constellation of defiant fireflies against an ocean of night. Jonah's voice carried across the open fleet channel, steady, ancient, unafraid. This is Admiral Kethvarakonquo. We do not come to conquer you. We do not come to bargain. We come to remember. We remember every world you ate. We remember every child who will never be born because of you. And we remember the one who taught us that even darkness can be loved into dawn. You were warned once long ago by a single lamp. Now you are warned by 2,000. He nodded to Prior Elijah. The monk opened the glass case. He lifted the original clay lamp, the same one that had burned on Narn Prime, the same one that had welcomed the quiet flame, the same one a child refilled every morning for 600 years. He held it out into vacuum, and the flame did not go out. Instead it grew, slowly at first a candle, then a torch, then a bonfire, then faster. The flame leapt from the clay lip to every lamp aboard every ship, and from those lamps to the hulls themselves, until the entire fleet blazed with a light that had no temperature yet warmed the soul. The Devourer recoiled. For the first time in its eternal hunger, it knew something like pain. Jonah spoke again, softer now, as a father speaks to a terrified child. You were not always this. Somewhere inside that darkness is a spark that once dreamed of being light. Come home. The fleet began to sing. Not a battle hymn, an old, old song. When the watchman had sung the day, he turned the silent reaper with sorrow instead of wrath. Human voices first, then Narn, then every tongue that had ever joined the quiet Federation. A lullaby older than stars. The Devourer screamed a sound that shattered worlds on the far side of the galaxy, yet it did not advance. The sphere of ships tightened, lamps burning brighter, song rising until it drowned the scream. And then in the heart of the Devourer, something answered. A single, trembling spark, so small it could have been mistaken for a trick of the light. But it grew in answer to the song, reaching toward the fleet like a drowning hand reaching for shore. Jonah's eyes filled with tears that did not fall in 0G. Open the center, he ordered. A perfect circle of ships parted. The spark shot forward, no longer small, now a comet, now a sun, now a figure of pure white fire. It stopped in the exact center of the lantern sphere, trembling, newborn. The clay lamp in Prior Elijah's claws flared one last time, bright enough to be seen from 1,000 light years, and the Devourer collapsed, not destroyed, transformed. Where the sphere of absence had been, a new star kindled, small, steady, the color of dawn on olive leaves. Around it, the saved remnants of 1,000 devoured worlds drifted gently, no longer forgotten. The fleet went dark, every lamp suddenly ordinary again. Silence fell, vast and awed. Jonah found he was weeping openly. Prior Elijah set the clay lamp, now cracked dark, finally spent back into its case. It is finished, the monk whispered. Jonah shook his head. No, brother, it's only just begun. Far away on the hill outside Nazareth, a small Narn child arrived at dawn to refill the lamp as she did every morning. She found the niche empty. For a moment she panicked, then she saw it. Single perfect flame, no wick, no oil, burning in midair above the stone where the lamp had always sat. She laughed, the sound carrying all the way to orbit. Across the Federation, every lamp that had ever been lit from the original flared once bright, proud, free, then settled into the same self-sustaining fire. The watchman stood on the shore of the lake again, older now or perhaps younger, barefoot in the grass. The carpenter sat beside him, feet in the water, smiling at nothing and everything. They did it, the watchman said, voice rough with unshed tears. They always do, the carpenter replied, when they remember whose children they are. The watchman looked at the new star burning where terror once reigned. Will it hold? He asked. The carpenter stood, water dripping from his feet that had once walked on it. It will hold as long as they keep singing. He placed a hand on the watchman's shoulder. "Your watch is over, old friend." The watchman closed his eyes, and for the first time in millennia, he wept without shame. When he opened them again, the lake was empty. Only the footprints remained, one set leading away, deeper into the olive groves toward the sound of children laughing. And somewhere in the perfect preservation of high Saturn orbit, a probe drifting past the rings picked up an ancient formation of ships, perfectly intact, crews frozen in expressions of sudden, awestruck peace. The Narn expeditionary fleet, the one that had vanished all those centuries ago, they had never been destroyed, they had been kept. Waiting. Now gently the golden lattice released them. Engines long cold flared to life. Comms crackled with voices that had not aged a day, and across every channel came a single, wondering transmission in perfect harmony. We saw him, and he let us come home. The galaxy looked up at its new star, and for the first time in recorded memory, it did not feel alone. Humanity had never guarded its home with walls, only with consequences, and the greatest consequence of all was this: love, offered freely, always finds its way back, even to the dark, even after 5,000 years, even forever.